My mother isn't just Dr. Angela Johnson from Vanderbilt Medical Center. 17-year-old Destiny Johnson announced to the circle of students surrounding her in Oakmont Valley High School's main hallway. Chunks of her severed locks scattered at her feet, like evidence at a crime scene. She's also on the board of directors for the Tennessee Civil Rights Commission. The digital recorder in her hand had been running for exactly 22 minutes, capturing every racial slur, every threat, and every sound of scissors cutting through her carefully maintained hair. Athletic Director Ryan Kellerman, watching the security feed from his office monitor, felt his chest tighten as he realized that 12 minutes from that moment, paramedics would be rushing him to Vanderbilt emergency room while federal investigators seized every file in his office. What had started as another day of keeping the scholarship kids in line was about to become the most expensive 12 minutes in Oakmont Valley High School's 70-year history. And Destiny Johnson, the quiet transfer student they thought they could intimidate into silence, was about to teach them that some people fight back with lawyers, not tears. We all carry stories about moments when we had to choose between fitting in and standing up. Destiny's choice in that hallway changed everything, not just for her, but for every student who came after. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most ordinary people, in the most unexpected moments, find the courage to rewrite the rules entirely. The story began 3 weeks earlier on a humid Monday morning in late September. Destiny had transferred to Oakmont Valley High from Memphis after her mother, Dr. Angela Johnson, accepted a position as head of pediatric surgery at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. The 45-minute commute to this affluent Nashville suburb was worth it for the academic opportunities. Or so they had thought. Destiny stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, with the kind of natural confidence that came from being raised by a single mother who had fought her way through medical school while working 3 jobs. Hair locks, which she had been growing for 4 years, fell to her shoulders in perfectly maintained spirals that caught the light as she moved. She wore them as a crown of cultural pride, each twist representing her connection to her heritage and her determination to never conform to someone else's standards of beauty. Dr. Johnson had prepared her daughter for the transition. "Baby," she had said while braiding Destiny's hair the night before her first day, "you're going to be one of only a handful of black students in that school. Some people might try to make you feel like you don't belong. But you remember this: your mind, your character, and your heritage are your superpowers. Nobody can take those from you." The Johnson family wasn't wealthy by Oakmont Valley standards, but they weren't struggling either. Dr. Johnson earned enough to afford a modest 3-bedroom home in the district, though it was considerably smaller than the McMansions that most of her daughter's classmates called home. Destiny drove a used Honda Civic that her mother had bought her for her 16th birthday, reliable, practical, and completely unremarkable next to the BMWs and Mercedes that filled the student parking lot. Oakmont Valley High School sat on 47 acres of manicured grounds, boasting state-of-the-art facilities that rivaled many colleges. The building itself was a monument to suburban prosperity, with its red brick facade, towering white columns, and meticulously landscaped courtyards. Inside, the hallways gleamed with polished floors and walls lined with trophy cases, celebrating decades of academic and athletic excellence. The student body of 2,300 was predominantly white, roughly 78%, with small populations of Asian students whose parents worked in Nashville's growing tech industry, Hispanic students whose families had found opportunities in the area's construction boom, and exactly 57 black students, most of whom were either children of recent college graduates or athletes recruited for their talents rather than their academic achievements. Destiny fell into neither category, and that immediately made her an anomaly. Her first day had gone smoothly enough. She impressed her AP literature teacher with her analysis of Toni Morrison's Beloved, earned nods of approval in AP chemistry, and held her own in advanced calculus. But it was during lunch that she first encountered the unofficial power structure that really governed Oakmont Valley High. The cafeteria was a study in social stratification. Athletes occupied the tables near the windows, their letter jackets and championship rings catching the afternoon sunlight. The theater kids clustered around tables covered with scripts and sheet music. Academic overachievers sat in neat rows, their conversations peppered with college application deadlines and scholarship requirements. And then there was the table in the exact center of the room, where the true royalty held court. Bryce Sullivan sat at the head of that table, like a king surveying his domain. At off-Dien, he possessed the kind of effortless athleticism and casual arrogance that made him both the star quarterback and the unofficial social director of the senior class. His blonde hair was styled with the kind of expensive product that looked natural but cost $40 a bottle, and his blue eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had never been told no about anything that mattered to him. His father, Robert Sullivan, owned the largest car dealership network in Middle Tennessee. With 7 locations that generated over $50 million in annual revenue. His mother, Patricia, sat on the school board and chaired the fundraising committee that had built the school's new athletic complex. When Bryce spoke, teachers listened. When he expressed preferences, administrators accommodated them. When he decided someone didn't belong, that person usually transferred schools or simply disappeared into the margins of social irrelevance. Beside him sat Caitlin Ross, whose perfectly straightened blonde hair and expertly applied makeup made her look like she had stepped out of a magazine. She was the head cheerleader, homecoming queen, and had already been accepted to Vanderbilt University on what everyone understood to be a donation-assisted admission. Her father owned a construction company that had built half the subdivisions in Williamson County, and her mother ran a boutique interior design firm that catered to Nashville's country music elite. Caitlin's social media presence was her weapon of choice. With 3,000 Instagram followers and a TikTok account that regularly went viral within their social circle, she could destroy someone's reputation with a single post. She understood the power of narrative, how a carefully edited video or a strategically cropped photo could reshape reality to serve her purposes. On that first day, Destiny had walked past their table without incident, choosing instead to sit with a small group of students she had met in her AP classes, but she felt their eyes on her, cataloging everything from her clothes to her hair to the way she carried herself. She was being assessed, measured, and judged according to criteria she couldn't yet understand. The first direct confrontation came during her second week. Destiny was walking to her locker after 5th period when she heard Caitlin's voice behind her, pitched just loud enough to be heard by the students changing classes in the hallway. "I just think it's interesting," Caitlin said to her friend Jessica, "how some people think they can just show up here and act like they own the place." Destiny paused at her locker. Her hand on the combination dial, she could feel the attention of nearby students shifting in her direction, sensing potential drama. "What do you mean?" Jessica asked. Playing her part in the performance. "Well, look at her," Caitlin continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "I mean, I'm sure that hairstyle means something in her culture. But this is Oakmont Valley. We have standards here. Professional standards." Destiny closed her locker carefully and turned around, her face calm, but her eyes sharp. "Excuse me. Are you talking to me?" Caitlin smiled, the expression sweet as poisoned honey. "Oh. Hi, I'm Caitlin. I was just telling Jessica how brave you are to wear your hair like that. It's so authentic." The word authentic hung in the air like a slur, loaded with implications about what was acceptable and what was merely tolerated. "Thank you," Destiny replied evenly. "I think my hair is beautiful exactly the way it is." "Oh. Of course," Caitlin laughed, a musical sound that somehow managed to be both dismissive and condescending. "I just meant that maybe for job interviews and things like that, you might want to consider something more, I don't know, mainstream. My mom knows some really good stylists who could help you fit in better." The hallway had gone quiet, students pretending to organize their lockers while straining to hear every word of the exchange. This was the kind of moment that would be dissected and analyzed for weeks, the kind of confrontation that established social hierarchies and defined reputations. Destiny looked at Caitlin for a long moment, her dark eyes steady and unblinking. "That's very thoughtful of you," she said finally, "but I don't need to fit in anywhere. I belong wherever I choose to be." She turned and walked away, leaving Caitlin with her mouth slightly open and a flush of embarrassment creeping up her neck. Several students hastily looked away, pretending they hadn't witnessed the exchange, while others pulled out their phones to text friends about what they had just seen. That night, Destiny called her mother from her bedroom, her voice tight with controlled frustration. "They're trying to make me feel like I don't belong here," she said, curled up on her bed with her physics textbook forgotten beside her. Doctor. Johnson was quiet for a moment. The sound of hospital equipment beeping softly in the background. She was finishing her shift, probably grabbing a quick dinner in the physician's lounge before heading home. Baby, she said finally, some people are going to test you because they're threatened by your confidence. They're going to try to make you doubt yourself. Make you think you need to change to be accepted. But you listen to me, you are brilliant. You are beautiful. And you are exactly where you're supposed to be. I know. Mama, it's just hard sometimes. I know it is. But remember what I've always told you. Document everything. Keep records. These people think they can say and do whatever they want because they've never faced real consequences. But times are changing. And accountability is coming for institutions like this, whether they're ready or not. Her mother's words proved prophetic over the following days, as the harassment escalated from subtle to overt. During third period AP History, Bryce made a point of loudly discussing a documentary he had watched about urban hair culture and how different cultural groups had different standards of cleanliness and professionalism. When Mr. Peterson failed to address the obvious targeting, Destiny made a mental note to research the teacher's disciplinary history. In the cafeteria, Caitlin began posting Instagram stories about interesting fashion choices and cultural experiments, never naming Destiny directly but making it clear who she was discussing through strategic camera angles and hashtags. The breaking point came during the third week. On a Friday morning that started like any other, Destiny arrived at school at 7:45 a.m., parking her Honda in the student lot and walking across the courtyard with her backpack slung over one shoulder. She had learned to be hyper-aware of her surroundings, noting which students were watching her and cataloging every interaction for the detailed journal she had started keeping. Her first 3 classes passed without incident, but she could feel the tension building like pressure before a storm. Students whispered more urgently in the hallways. Phones appeared and disappeared with suspicious frequency, and Caitlin kept catching her eye across crowded rooms with a smile that promised trouble. At 11:30 a.m., Destiny was walking from AP Chemistry to her locker when she noticed the unusual crowd gathered near the main hallway intersection. Students were clustered in groups, their voices low but excited. The way people gathered when they sensed drama approaching. She was reaching for her combination lock when she heard Bryce's voice behind her. Hey, new girl. Destiny turned around to find him standing with Caitlin and 3 of their friends, forming a semicircle that effectively blocked her path to her next class. Other students had stopped pretending to mind their own business and were openly staring now, some with their phones already in their hands. My name is Destiny, she said calmly, though her heart was beginning to race. Right? Destiny, Bryce said, pronouncing her name like it was foreign and difficult. We need to talk. About what? Caitlin stepped forward, her expression serious, but her eyes bright with anticipation. We've been talking to some of the other students, and there are concerns about, well, about how you're representing our school. Representing your school how? Look, Bryce said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. Oakmont Valley has a reputation to maintain. We're not some inner-city school where anything goes. We have standards here, and when someone comes in from outside and doesn't understand those standards, it reflects poorly on all of us. Destiny felt something cold settle in her stomach, but her voice remained steady. What standards are you talking about specifically? Caitlin pulled out her phone and held it up. The camera pointed directly at Destiny's face. We just think maybe you need some help understanding how to present yourself appropriately. You know, for your own good. Put your phone away, Destiny said firmly. It's a free country, Caitlin replied, her finger hovering over the record button. I can film whatever I want in a public space. The crowd of students had grown larger, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Destiny could see Mrs. Patricia Gonzalez, the AP Spanish teacher, approaching from down the hallway. But she was still 30 yards away and moving through the crowd slowly. Here's what's going to happen, Bryce said, reaching into his backpack and pulling out a pair of scissors, the kind used in art class, with sharp steel blades and black plastic handles. We're going to help you fit in better here. Consider it a welcome gift. Destiny's blood turned to ice as she realized what they were planning. She took a step backward, but found her path blocked by other students who had moved in behind her. You're not touching my hair, she said, her voice carrying enough authority to make several students in the crowd shift uncomfortably. "Relax," Caitlin said, her phone now recording and her voice taking on the sweet, reasonable tone she used when she wanted to seem innocent. "We're just trying to help you look more professional, more appropriate for Oakmont Valley standards." Bryce stepped forward with the scissors, and Destiny realized, with crystal clarity, that this moment would define everything that came after. She could submit, let them humiliate her, and spend the rest of her time at this school as a cautionary tale about knowing your place, or she could fight back. What they didn't know was that tucked inside her blazer pocket was a digital voice recorder that had been running since she arrived at school that morning. What they couldn't have anticipated was that her mother hadn't just raised her to be confident, she had raised her to be strategic. "Bryce Sullivan," Destiny said clearly, her voice carrying across the crowded hallway, "you are threatening to assault me with a weapon in front of dozens of witnesses. Are you sure you want to do this?" For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. But then Caitlin's voice piped up from behind her phone camera. "Oh my God. Stop being so dramatic. It's just hair. It's not like it won't grow back." And that was when Bryce reached for her locks. The scissors connected with her hair just above her left ear, slicing through months of careful growth and cultural pride, with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent hallway. A chunk of beautiful black spiral fell to the polished floor, like a piece of her soul had been severed. The crowd gasped, collectively, some students stepping back as if the violence had splashed outward and might contaminate them. Others leaned forward, their phones capturing every second of the violation. Destiny stood frozen for a heartbeat, feeling the weight of her remaining locks and the cold air on her newly exposed scalp. Then she looked down at her severed hair lying on the floor, looked up at Bryce's satisfied smirk, and made a decision that would change everything. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Bryce frowned, confused by her response. "What?" Destiny reached into her blazer and pulled out the digital recorder, holding it up for everyone to see. "I said thank you, because what you just did was assault with a deadly weapon, caught on multiple recordings, with dozens of witnesses, in a public institution. And I have been documenting every single incident of racial harassment at this school for the past 3 weeks." The color drained from Bryce's face as the implications began to sink in, but more importantly, Destiny continued, her voice growing stronger and carrying clearly through the silent hallway. "What you don't know is that my mother isn't just Dr. Angela Johnson from Vanderbilt Medical Center. She's also on the board of directors for the Tennessee Civil Rights Commission, and she's been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence to launch a federal investigation into the culture of institutional racism at this school." Caitlin's phone was still recording, but her hand had begun to shake. "So thank you, Bryce Sullivan, for being stupid enough to commit a hate crime on camera. Thank you for giving me everything I need to destroy the system that created you." The hallway erupted in whispers and gasps, as students realized they had just witnessed something that would have consequences far beyond typical high school drama. Some began backing away, as if proximity to the incident might implicate them. Others pressed closer, understanding that they were witnessing history. But what nobody expected was what Destiny did next. She walked to the nearest emergency call box, the red button connected directly to the school's security system and the local police department, and pressed it firmly. "This is Destiny Johnson in the main hallway of Oakmont Valley High School," she said clearly into the speaker. "I need to report a racially motivated assault with a weapon that just occurred on school grounds. Multiple witnesses, multiple recordings, and I need both security and police response immediately." The emergency alarm began blaring throughout the building, its piercing wail echoing off the walls and sending teachers rushing from their classrooms to investigate. And in his office at the far end of the administrative wing, Athletic Director Ryan Kellerman, who had been having lunch with school board member Patricia Sullivan, Bryce's mother, when the call came through, felt his chest tighten with the first symptoms of what would become a complete cardiovascular collapse. The emergency alarm that pierced through Oakmont Valley High School at 11:52 a.m. on that Friday morning would later be remembered as the sound that marked the end of an era. Within 30 seconds of Destiny Johnson's call, every classroom door in the building had opened. Teachers, stepping into hallways with the practiced urgency of people trained for lockdown procedures, only to find something far more complex than any drill had prepared them for. In the main hallway, the circle of students around Destiny began to shift and break apart as the reality of the situation crystallized. Some fumbled with their phones, frantically deleting videos they had filmed, while others clutched their devices closer, recognizing that they held evidence of something historic. The chunk of Destiny's severed locks remained on the polished floor like an accusation that couldn't be swept away. Bryce Sullivan stood frozen, the scissors still in his hand, his face cycling through expressions of confusion, anger, and the first creeping tendrils of genuine fear. 3 years of being untouchable had not prepared him for the possibility that his actions might have consequences that his father's money couldn't erase. Caitlin Ross, her phone still recording, stepped backward into the crowd, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the pallor that had crept across her features. The livestream she had planned as entertainment was rapidly becoming evidence in what she was beginning to understand might be a federal case. Security Officer Marcus Thompson, a 20-year veteran of the Metro Nashville Police Department who had taken the school position after retiring from active duty, arrived in the hallway at exactly 11:54 a.m. What he saw there contradicted every expectation he had formed during his 2 years at Oakmont Valley. A black student stood calmly in the center of a crowd, her hair visibly damaged, holding what appeared to be a recording device, while a white student held scissors and multiple phones captured the scene. The power dynamics were clear, but they were the reverse of what Thompson had been conditioned to expect in a school where disciplinary statistics showed black students were suspended at nearly 4 times the rate of their white counterparts. "Everyone step back," Thompson commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Phones away. Nobody leaves this hallway until I understand what happened here." Destiny looked directly at the security officer, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Officer Thompson, my name is Destiny Johnson." At approximately 11:47 a.m., Bryce Sullivan used those scissors to cut my hair without my consent after subjecting me to racially motivated harassment. I have the entire incident recorded. There are multiple witnesses, and I need to file a formal complaint for assault and hate crime charges. The specificity of her language, the calm precision of her account, and the legal terminology she employed made Thompson pause. In his experience, victims of assault were usually emotional, confused, sometimes incoherent. Destiny Johnson spoke like someone who had been expecting this moment and had prepared for it accordingly. "Son," Thompson said, turning to Bryce, "put those scissors on the ground and step away from them." Bryce's hand tightened around the scissors, his mouth opening and closing, as he struggled to find words that might restore his sense of control over the situation. "This is insane," he finally managed. "I barely touched her hair. It was just a joke. She's completely overreacting. Put the scissors down now," Thompson repeated, his hand moving instinctively toward the radio on his belt. It was at that moment that Principal Dr. Margaret Foster arrived, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she pushed through the crowd of students. At 54 years old, Dr. Foster had built her career on avoiding conflicts that might reflect poorly on the school's reputation. Her immediate instinct was damage control, not justice. "Officer Thompson, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding between students," she said, barely glancing at Destiny before focusing her attention on Bryce. "Perhaps we should handle this internally, through normal disciplinary channels." Destiny turned to face the principal, her dark eyes blazing with an intensity that made several nearby students take involuntary steps backward. "Dr. Foster, there is nothing normal or internal about a racially motivated assault with a weapon. This is a federal hate crime, and I will not allow you to minimize it or sweep it under the rug like you've done with every other incident of racism at this school." The principal's face flushed red, whether from embarrassment or anger. It was impossible to tell. "Miss Johnson, I understand you're upset, but accusations like that are very serious. You need to be careful about making claims you can't substantiate." "I can substantiate everything," Destiny replied, holding up her digital recorder. 3 weeks of documented harassment, racial slurs, threats, and administrative indifference. Today's assault is just the culmination. Thompson, who had been listening to this exchange with growing concern, made a decision that would prove pivotal in everything that followed. Instead of deferring to the principal's authority, he followed protocol and radioed for backup. Dispatch. This is Thompson at Oakmont Valley High School. I need a supervisor and an investigating officer for an alleged assault with a weapon and possible hate crime. Multiple witnesses. Victim is coherent and requesting to file formal charges. The words hate crime crackled through the radio frequency and immediately escalated the situation beyond anything Dr. Foster could contain through internal politics. Within the Metro Nashville Police Department's Communications Center, flags were raised. Supervisors were notified, and protocols designed to handle civil rights violations were activated. Meanwhile, in the administrative wing of the school, Athletic Director Ryan Kellerman was experiencing the first full-blown panic attack of his 43-year life. He had been in his office with Patricia Sullivan, Bryce's mother and school board member. When the emergency call came through the building's communication system, the words racially motivated assault and federal investigation had struck him like physical blows. Kellerman had spent 15 years building a culture within the athletic department that prioritized winning over everything else. Under his leadership, the football team had won 3 state championships. The basketball team had made it to regionals 4 times. And college recruiters regularly visited Oakmont Valley to scout talent. What he had also built, though he would never admit it publicly, was a system that protected his star athletes from consequences, regardless of their behavior off the field. The disciplinary files locked in his desk drawer told the real story: 17 incidents over the past 5 years, where black students had been suspended or expelled for fighting, while white athletes involved in the same incidents received warnings or brief suspensions. 23 complaints of racial harassment that had been dismissed as misunderstandings or teenage drama. 8 transfers of black students who had been bullied out of the school rather than face continued harassment. Patricia Sullivan, sitting across from his desk with her perfectly manicured nails and designer suit, represented everything Kellerman feared losing. Her husband's construction company had donated $2.7 million for the new athletic complex. Her influence on the school board had secured Kellerman's promotion and protected him from questions about his disciplinary practices. And her son Bryce was the quarterback who was supposed to lead them to another state championship. This has to be contained, Patricia said, her voice tight with controlled panic. Whatever this girl thinks happened, we need to control the narrative before it gets out of hand. Kellerman nodded, but his chest felt tight, and his left arm was beginning to ache in a way that seemed unrelated to stress. I'll talk to Foster. We can frame this as a disciplinary matter, maybe suggest the girl has emotional problems, difficulty adjusting to a new school. Exactly, and we need to get ahead of any social media coverage. Caitlin can post something about how the situation was misunderstood, how everyone is actually friends now. It was at that moment that Kellerman's phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Foster's extension, and when he answered, her voice was strained and urgent. Ryan, we have a problem. The police are here. Real police. Not just security. They're talking about hate crime charges and federal investigations. That Johnson girl has recordings, and she says her mother is connected to civil rights organizations. Kellerman felt the room begin to spin slightly, his vision narrowing at the edges. What kind of recordings? I don't know yet. But she seems to have been documenting everything for weeks. Ryan, if this gets out, if there's really an investigation. The phone slipped from Kellerman's suddenly numb fingers, clattering onto his desk as the full implications of the situation crashed over him. Federal investigations meant audits of disciplinary practices. They meant reviews of every decision he had made to protect athletes, every complaint he had dismissed, every pattern of bias he had created and maintained. Patricia Sullivan watched in alarm as Kellerman's face went gray, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air-conditioned office. Ryan, are you okay? Kellerman tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The tightness in his chest had become a crushing weight, and his left arm was now completely numb. The panic attack was transforming into something far more serious, something that would require an ambulance and emergency medical intervention. Outside in the hallway, the situation was evolving rapidly. Detective Sarah Martinez, a 15-year veteran of the Metro Nashville Police Department's Special Victims Unit, had arrived to take charge of the investigation. Unlike Security Officer Thompson, Detective Martinez had extensive experience with hate crime cases and immediately recognized the significance of what she was witnessing. "Miss Johnson," she said, approaching Destiny with the professional courtesy she reserved for witnesses who might also become plaintiffs in federal cases. "I understand you want to file charges for assault and racial intimidation. Before we proceed, I want you to know that you have the right to have a parent or guardian present during questioning." Destiny pulled out her phone and showed Detective Martinez her mother's contact information. "My mother is Dr. Angela Johnson at Vanderbilt Medical Center. She's also on the board of the Tennessee Civil Rights Commission. I'd like her present, but I'm prepared to give a preliminary statement now." The mention of the Civil Rights Commission caused Detective Martinez to pause and reassess the situation. This wasn't just a school disciplinary matter or even a simple assault case. This was potentially a high-profile civil rights violation with federal implications. "All right," Martinez said. "Let's start with what happened today, and then we'll discuss the context you mentioned." Destiny activated her digital recorder and began playing back the events of that morning. The quality was remarkably clear, capturing not just the words but the tone of contempt in Bryce's voice, the calculated cruelty in Caitlin's comments, and the moment when scissors connected with hair. As the recording played, the crowd of students that had gathered around them grew silent. Many were hearing the full conversation for the first time, understanding how what they had witnessed as isolated drama was actually part of a larger pattern of systematic harassment. Detective Martinez took notes as she listened, her expression growing increasingly serious. When the recording reached the moment of the actual assault, she stopped the playback and looked directly at Bryce Sullivan. "Mr. Sullivan, you're under arrest for assault with a weapon. You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda rights echoed through the hallway as handcuffs clicked around Bryce's wrists. The sound seemed to break the spell that had held the crowd frozen. And suddenly students were moving, talking, pulling out phones to call parents and post updates to social media. Caitlin Ross, realizing that her own phone contained evidence of her participation in the harassment, tried to delete her Instagram stories and TikTok videos. What she didn't realize was that several students had already screen-recorded her content and that digital forensics specialists would be able to recover deleted files from her device. Dr. Foster, watching her star quarterback being led away in handcuffs, made increasingly desperate attempts to control the situation. Detective Martinez, surely this can be handled as a school disciplinary matter. "Mr. Sullivan is a good student with no history of violence." "Ma'am," Martinez replied firmly, "assault with a weapon based on racial animus is a felony under Tennessee state law and potentially a federal hate crime. This is not a school disciplinary matter. This is a criminal investigation." It was at that moment that the ambulance arrived. Ryan Kellerman's cardiac episode had been reported by his secretary, who found him collapsed in his office with Patricia Sullivan frantically calling for help. The paramedics who responded found a middle-aged man in full cardiovascular distress, his pulse erratic, and his blood pressure dangerously elevated. As they wheeled Kellerman out of the building on a stretcher, past the crowd of students and arriving news crews, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. The man who had spent years protecting a culture of athletic privilege and racial intimidation was being carried away, his career and his health destroyed by the very system he had created. Dr. Angela Johnson arrived at the school at 1:47 p.m. Having left Vanderbilt Medical Center the moment she received her daughter's call, she found Destiny in the main office, calm and composed, giving a detailed statement to Detective Martinez, while a representative from the Tennessee Civil Rights Commission took notes. The reunion between mother and daughter was quiet but intense. Dr. Johnson examined the damage to Destiny's hair, her physician's hands gentle as she assessed not just the physical harm, but the psychological impact of the violation. "How are you feeling, baby?" she asked softly. "I'm angry," Destiny replied honestly, "but I'm not surprised, and I'm not backing down." "Doctor," Johnson smiled, pride evident in her dark eyes. "Good, because what happens next is going to determine whether this school continues to be a place where racism is tolerated or becomes an example of how institutions can change." The civil rights representative, Michael Thompson, leaned forward. "Miss Johnson, Your daughter has provided us with extensive documentation of a pattern of racial harassment and institutional indifference. Combined with today's assault, we have grounds for a comprehensive federal investigation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. What does that mean exactly? Destiny asked. It means, Dr. Johnson explained, that the federal government will review every disciplinary action this school has taken for the past several years, looking for patterns of racial bias. They'll examine policies, procedures, and outcomes, and if they find systematic discrimination, they can mandate changes, remove administrators, and even threaten federal funding. Outside the school, the media presence was growing. Local news stations had picked up the story through police scanner traffic, and by 3 p.m., national outlets were beginning to take notice. The combination of racial violence, institutional cover-up, and dramatic consequences created exactly the kind of narrative that captured public attention. Social media amplified the story exponentially. Justice for Destiny began trending on Twitter, with students from Oakmont Valley and across the country sharing their own experiences of racial harassment in educational settings. The video of Bryce's arrest, filmed by multiple students, went viral within hours. But perhaps the most powerful piece of content was a TikTok video posted by a student named Marcus Williams, a black junior who had been bullied by Bryce's crew the previous year. In the 60-second video, Marcus shared his own story of harassment, followed by clips of Destiny's calm, powerful statement to police. "This is what standing up looks like," Marcus said in the video. "This is what happens when someone is brave enough to document everything, smart enough to know their rights, and strong enough to demand justice." The video was viewed over 2 million times in its first day online. Meanwhile, the investigation was expanding rapidly. Detective Martinez, working with federal civil rights investigators who had arrived from the FBI's Nashville field office, was reviewing Destiny's recordings and cross-referencing them with disciplinary records, student complaints, and social media activity. What they found was a systematic pattern of racial bias that went far beyond Bryce Sullivan's individual actions. The data showed that black students at Oakmont Valley were suspended at nearly 4 times the rate of white students for similar infractions. Complaints of racial harassment were routinely dismissed or minimized, and star athletes, regardless of their behavior, received preferential treatment in all disciplinary matters. The investigation also revealed Ryan Kellerman's role in maintaining this system. Email records showed that he had repeatedly intervened to reduce punishments for white athletes while pushing for harsher consequences for black students. Text messages between Kellerman and board members revealed discussions about maintaining standards and keeping certain elements in line that, in context, clearly referred to racial minorities. By Monday morning, the story had reached national news. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News all led with segments about the Oakmont Valley hair attack and the subsequent federal investigation. Civil rights leaders from across the country were calling for comprehensive reform of the school district, while conservative commentators argued that the reaction was overblown. But perhaps the most significant development came on Tuesday, when the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights announced a formal investigation into the entire Williamson County School District, with Oakmont Valley High School as the primary focus. The announcement came with a letter to the district that laid out specific areas of concern: racial disparities in disciplinary actions, inadequate response to harassment complaints, and failure to provide a safe educational environment for all students. The letter also mentioned the possibility of federal funding being at risk if systematic changes were not implemented. For Destiny, the week following the incident was a whirlwind of interviews, meetings, and national attention. She found herself in the surreal position of being a teenage spokesperson for civil rights reform in education, a role she had never sought but embraced with characteristic determination. On Friday, exactly 1 week after Bryce Sullivan had cut her hair, Destiny stood before a packed auditorium at Vanderbilt University, addressing a conference on educational equity. Her hair, which she had decided not to cut evenly, but to wear as evidence of the assault, caught the stage lights as she spoke. "What happened to me was not unique," she told the audience of educators, civil rights advocates, and policymakers. "It was just documented. For every student brave enough to record their harassment, There are dozens who suffer in silence because they don't think anyone will believe them or because they're afraid of retaliation. She paused, looking out at the crowd that included several Oakmont Valley students who had driven to Nashville to hear her speak. But what I learned this week is that silence protects the system, not the victims. When we document discrimination, when we demand accountability, when we refuse to accept that this is just how things are, we create the possibility for real change. The applause was thunderous. But destiny wasn't finished. My mother taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act despite being afraid. I was terrified when Bryce Sullivan came at me with those scissors, but I was more afraid of what would happen if I stayed silent. How many more students would be attacked? How many more complaints would be dismissed? How many more years would this system continue to protect bullies and silence victims? The audience rose to their feet as Destiny concluded her remarks. Among those applauding were several of her former classmates, including Marcus Williams, who had become an unexpected ally and advocate for change at the school. But not everyone was celebrating. The Sullivan family, facing criminal charges, civil liability, and social ostracism, had hired one of Nashville's most expensive law firms to manage their crisis. Robert Sullivan's car dealerships were experiencing boycotts. Patricia Sullivan had resigned from the school board under pressure, and Bryce was looking at the possibility of serving time in juvenile detention. Caitlin Ross, charged as an accessory to assault and facing her own civil rights violation allegations, had deactivated all her social media accounts and was reportedly receiving death threats. Her family's construction business had lost several major contracts as clients distanced themselves from the controversy. Ryan Kellerman, released from the hospital after suffering what doctors classified as a stress-induced cardiac episode, found himself facing termination, criminal charges for civil rights violations, and a federal investigation into his 15 years of discriminatory practices. His career in education was effectively over, but the most significant changes were happening at Oakmont Valley High School itself. Dr. Foster had been placed on administrative leave pending the federal investigation. An interim principal, Dr. James Washington, a black educator with extensive experience in diversity and inclusion, had been brought in to oversee comprehensive reforms. The changes were immediate and dramatic. Mandatory bias training for all staff, a new zero-tolerance policy for racial harassment, an independent ombudsman to investigate complaints, and perhaps most importantly, a student-led diversity and inclusion committee with real power to recommend policy changes and disciplinary actions. Destiny had been elected as the committee's first chair, a position that gave her a formal voice in the school's governance and the ability to ensure that the reforms were more than cosmetic changes. On the 6-month anniversary of the haircutting incident, Destiny stood in the same hallway where she had been attacked. But the space felt completely different. The walls now featured artwork celebrating diversity and inclusion. A memorial had been installed honoring victims of school-based discrimination, and most importantly, the culture had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Students who had once looked away when witnessing harassment now intervened. Teachers who had once ignored microaggressions now addressed them directly. Administrators who had once prioritized reputation over justice now understood that true excellence required equity. Bryce Sullivan had been sentenced to 18 months in juvenile detention and was required to complete 500 hours of community service focused on racial justice education. Upon his release, he would be prohibited from contacting Destiny or attending any school in the district. Caitlin Ross had received probation and was required to undergo extensive counseling for her role in the harassment campaign. Her college admissions had been rescinded, and she was working to rebuild her life away from the social media influence that had defined her teenage years. Ryan Kellerman had been convicted on federal civil rights charges and sentenced to 3 years in prison. His conviction sent a clear message to educators across the country that enabling discrimination would have serious legal consequences. But perhaps the most meaningful change was personal. Destiny had decided to keep her hair in its damaged state for the entire school year, letting it serve as a visible reminder of what had happened and what could be overcome. She wore it proudly, each shortened lock a symbol of resistance and resilience, as she prepared to graduate as valedictorian, with acceptance letters from Harvard, Yale, and Stanford covering her bedroom wall. Destiny reflected on the year that had changed everything. She had entered Oakmont Valley High School as a transfer student seeking academic opportunities. She was leaving as a civil rights advocate who had transformed an entire educational system. The final recognition came at graduation, when Dr. Washington announced that the main hallway where the incident had occurred would be renamed the Destiny Johnson Courage Corridor, with a plaque commemorating her bravery and the changes that followed. But for Destiny, the real victory wasn't the accolades or the national attention, or even the systemic changes she had inspired. It was the knowledge that no other student would have to endure what she had experienced. The system that had protected bullies and silenced victims had been dismantled and rebuilt with justice as its foundation. As she walked across the graduation stage to receive her diploma, her shortened locks catching the stage lights, Destiny Johnson embodied the truth her mother had taught her years earlier, that courage, documentation, and determination could indeed change the world, one institution at a time. The 12 minutes that had begun with the sound of scissors cutting through her hair had ended with the sound of handcuffs closing on injustice. And in the space between those sounds, everything had changed.